Last night was not only the conclusion of Ironheart, but also the 5th phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What did I think of the show? What can we expect for the future of these characters? And could we see an Ironheart Season 2? All that and more in today's video. So as I said, last night was the conclusion of Ironheart, with the final 3 episodes, Bad Magic, Karma's a Glitch, and The Past is the Past. Just a refresher, coming off the first 3 episodes, I was enjoying the show, but I felt like there were certain areas that they could have improved on. And for the most part, I really have to say that these 3 episodes improved on the areas that the first 3 were kind of lacking in. I feel like the pacing did drag in certain areas, but it did always feel like the plot was really moving, which is kind of what you have to do when you have 6 episodes of a show. As much as I like my character building filler, you don't have a lot of time to add fluff for the remaining 3 episodes. One thing I think worked really well for this show was the way they split up the episodes. It really feels like Act 1 and Act 2. It didn't feel like other Marvel shows where they had to rush to get every single plot point wrapped up at the last second. Episode 4 on kind of gives you a good idea of how the show is going to wrap up. Nothing was rushed and you don't feel unsatisfied with any of the plot points that they left open, because what they did set up was really exciting for the future. Now, I would have liked to talk a little bit more about this show without spoilers, but we are talking about the final 3 episodes in a 6-episode series, so it's a little hard to avoid here. Now, yesterday I made a video talking about the potential future for Zeke Stane in the MCU, and I still agree with a lot of what I had to say in that video. I like the way Zeke Stane was introduced, and I'm excited to see what the future of this character is going to be. I was a little worried that with the integration of Zeke Stane into the Hood's team, they were just setting him up to die by the end of the series, but I did really like how he was used. And I also have to point out once again just how great Alden Reich is in this role. He gets some Evil Dead-esque physical comedy to do in this, which at first I wasn't sure about, but I think his performance really sold it. I especially liked the scene where he was incarcerated and all of the news footage is talking about how he is the problem on Obadiah Stane's legacy. I think that's a really interesting plot point for them to explore later on, but I really like the way he left things off with Riri, clearly setting up future conflicts between those characters, but in a very civil way. As far as Parker Robbins' character development in this show as it continued, I think it did improve a little bit. Now, I am going to be going into deep spoilers here, so if you haven't watched the show yet and you don't want to know anything, this is your time to tap out. But at the end of episode 5, we learn a little bit about the backstory of Parker Robbins. The Hood has been continuously corrupting him since the beginning of the season, but we never really learned what his motivation was or who he was as an individual before the Hood came into his life. Now, I understand the aspect of trying to maintain the mystery behind that, but I feel like it would have been beneficial to the character and my enjoyment of this arc if we saw that younger, more naive and vulnerable side of him that we end up seeing in episode 5. My previous criticism being that he was extremely one note in the first 3 episodes, and I think it was rectified for the most part with the finale, but as far as complaints go, that is an extremely minor one that I had with this show. I know this was a character a lot of people didn't really like in Black Panther Wakanda Forever, and I'm gonna be honest, I never really understood why. I can understand not really liking the suit design from Wakanda Forever, but I've already talked about that enough. I really did like the 3 suits that we got in this show. The all-white MIT user interface suit that we had at the beginning of the show was really cool. I also really enjoyed the junk suit and how much screen time that one got. And I was a little iffy on the final suit. Pictures of it from the shoulders up went online a couple days earlier, and I wasn't crazy about it, but finally seeing it in motion in the show made me appreciate it that much more. As far as her characterization goes, I think it is the strongest part of this show. This is a character who makes some pretty big mistakes, similar to Tony Stark in a way. And just like Tony Stark, she feels obligated to use her genius in order to protect everybody around her. Riri has the potential to be an extremely selfish character at certain points in the show, but she never dips into being an unlikable character, and that all builds up to a decision she makes at the conclusion of the show. Which, now we gotta talk about Sacha Baron Cohen's appearance in the finale of Ironheart. Now, I was trying to maintain that I thought Mephisto was going to be a misdirect, that due to Parker Robbins' origin in the comics, that he would most likely be playing a human avatar of Dormammu. MCU. And the beginning of the 5th episode nearly vindicated me. I was ready to run to the computer and say I was right about this. Well, it seems like I was partially correct. It seems like the Hood does get his powers from Dormammu. That is the origin of the Hood. But for whatever reason, Mephisto was holding on to the Hood, resulting in the grand reveal that Sacha Baron Cohen is playing Mephisto in the MCU. Now, I can't even be mad about being wrong because that is great casting. Sacha Baron Cohen has this con man energy to him, but he's extremely charismatic and you want to trust him almost. And between the two scenes that he fully appears in, he switched accents. He has this Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka energy to him, where what he says and does makes him extremely untrustworthy, but there's a quality to him that makes not only the characters, but also the audience want to keep listening to what he has to say. But I've heard a lot of people question, why was this the show that Mephisto was introduced in? Wouldn't it make more sense to introduce him in something like WandaVision or Doctor Strange or even Agatha All Along? And I really do think that Ironheart's biggest strength is the fact that it doesn't just sit in one world of the MCU, it merges two of them. Ironheart being street level but also magical at the same time gives it a very interesting tone compared to everything else in the MCU right now. And with Riri Williams being a very grief-stricken, young, naive, and impulsive genius, she is the perfect target for a character like Mephisto. And I was fully rooting for her to decline Mephisto's offer at the end of the episode. However, I think there's an extremely exciting possibility that a lot of people are going to be thinking about, given the fact that Riri Williams made a deal with Mephisto. And that's the fact that this could possibly be one of the first Ghost Riders we see in the MCU. I know Robbie Reyes has already been introduced in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but currently that is still not considered canon to the MCU. And I can't be the only one who wants to see Ghost Rider use something similar to an Iron Man suit. But that is just me theorizing at this point on what could happen to this character in the future. Now, as far as the loose ends that this show leaves off with, is there going to be an Ironheart Season 2? Probably not. As I've stated in other videos, Marvel wants to move away from the miniseries format on Disney+. They've also made the decision to go away from making bigger shows on Disney+. The storylines featured in Disney+ series aren't going to be necessary to understand events that are happening in movies. Now, there were rumors prior to this big change at Marvel that we would be getting a Wong-centric show focusing on him training a couple up-and-coming sorcerers at Kamar-Taj, something the post-credit scene of this show kind of alludes to. Parker Robbins, now lacking the influence of the Hood, goes to Zelma Stanton for assistance in trying to recover his scars and retrieve his soul from Mephisto. Zelma Stanton in the MCU is a sorcerer who was taught by her mother, a Kamar-Taj dropout, and the show would follow them being trained by Doctor Strange or Wong in the mystic arts, and kind of expanding the magical side of the MCU. Now, I think there is potential on Marvel revisiting that idea at some point, but I have a feeling that a lot of these plot points are going to be revisited in Doctor Strange 3. Currently, he is in the Dark Dimension with Clea trying to reverse an incursion that he caused in Multiverse of Madness. And currently, Benedict Cumberbatch is not on the cast list for Avengers Doomsday. So I think it's possible we could see a Doctor Strange movie that bridges the gap between Doomsday and Secret Wars. Currently, there is an untitled movie on the release schedule for 2027, and I've seen some speculation that it could be Black Panther 3, but I feel like Doctor Strange 3 is the natural choice, acting as kind of the Ant-Man character in Secret Wars. But if you know Doctor Doom's backstory, you also know that Mephisto plays a role in it, and having that movie bridge the gap between these two bigger Avengers movies makes sense. But I think that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.